With this, let me invite Dr. Pramod Kumar Pandey. May I request Dr. Pramod Kumar Pandey to please chair this session. Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you so much. We'll be discussing today congenital cranial degeneration disorders. As we all know, these are rare strabismus syndromes, and they quite often create a lot of diagnostic and therapeutic difficulties. So it is.
इसका स्लाइड शो कर दीजिए.
स्लाइड शो नहीं हो रहा.
स्लाइड शो हो रहा है, इसको प्रेजेंटेशन में करना पड़ेगा. दिस इज फाइन. या नेक्स्ट हियर
आगे सर, आगे इससे आगे
स्लाइड शो का ऑप्शन है. आगे
नहीं सर, इससे पहले वाला.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay.
Today we'll be talking about congenital cranial degeneration disorders. As we know that these are rare conditions, and they produce complex strabismus syndromes, and which are difficult to diagnose and treat. As we all know that these conditions were known as fibrosis syndromes earlier. We know about them for about since 1840, 1850, but these were known as congenital fibrosis syndromes. But slowly we realized over the turn of the century that the problem is with the neural innervation. These are neural issues rather muscle issues. So they have been known as congenital cranial degeneration disorders. Now this was done in 2002. Since then, a lot of things have changed because of improvement in imaging and in genetics. Now these two things mainly have made us understand these conditions much better as we understand them now, and a lot of new conditions are being added, and we are able to enlarge our insights and understand them better. Now the concept of CCDDs is that these are abnormal congenital eye, eyelid and or facial movements. These are heritable mostly, but they can also be sporadic from mutations. They are developmental abnormalities of the cranial nuclei and or nerves. So nerves we can visualize easily on the MRI with the improvement in MRIs. Of course, the nuclei are not easy to visualize. There is a primary degeneration, means there is lack of innervation, and there is a secondary degeneration, which means that there is aberrant innervation. That means the innervation which was supposed to reach has not reached. So some innervation has come from somewhere else, and this creates all the issues, and lot of cascade of events take place because of the aberrant innervation. Now broadly we can classify them as the level of the midbrain or as the level of the pons and medulla. Now at the level of the midbrain, they are going to produce mostly vertical motility problems, and at the level of pons and medulla, they are going to produce horizontal motility problems. And at times we also have situations where both are mixed up, because these are generalized issues, so they cannot always be segregated in a watertight way. So if you look at the midbrain level, you can have what are known as congenital fibrosis of extraocular muscles, which is again a very vast group, expanding group now, seen in about 2.5 lakh population, so quite rare. Then you have congenital MED, which we call as monoocular elevation deficiency. Then you have congenital Browns and congenital third and fourth nerve palsies, which have also been, a good number of them have also been classed as CCDDs now because of the features on MRI and on genetics, but there's less genetics and more MRI in calling these conditions as CCDD as of now. But as we progress, probably with time, we will be able to delineate better the chromosomal abnormalities in these conditions. Then, of course, you have congenital ptosis, usually bilateral, and this can also be a CCDD. Then you have what is known as MGP, the Marcus-Gunn jaw winking phenomena. And then when we come at the pons and medulla level, we have the Duane's syndrome or Duane's retraction syndrome. We don't like to use the retraction word all the time because at times it is not there. So this is the commonest CCDD, as we all know, and we all encounter it once in a while. And Professor Pradeep will be talking about it in great detail after my talk. Then we have synergistic divergence, Bosley-Sally-Eloreni syndrome, and Athapskan brainstem dysgenesis syndrome. These are syndromes which are like DRS. They share features with DRS, and they also have middle ear, inner ear problems, the empty cavity syndrome. So they also have a lot of issues with hearing. And quite often, as you know, DRS is quite often associated with hearing problems. Then you have what is horizontal gaze palsy and progressive scoliosis. These cases are quite interesting because the scoliosis may not be there when child is young, or it comes actually later. And you may, if you don't examine carefully, you may meet the horizontal gaze palsy, and person may not have too many symptoms, or he or she may not be complaining. So this is one diagnosis we should keep in mind, which can easily be missed, and he or she may just pass off as scoliosis. And I have seen some patients which have gone to orthopedics and other places. They have come back and nobody has diagnosed them. They have just been sort of labeled as scoliosis. Now you also have Mobius. We all know about Mobius. It was described by Paul Julius Mobius, and a German Leipzig neurologist. And it has very interesting features. It has developed in a great way over all these years, and we understand a lot more about Mobius and Kalman syndromes. In fact, it is called as Mobius sequence rather than syndrome. And it has a lot of systemic manifestations and a lot of ocular manifestations, which is very interesting. And autism also one can have. Then you can also have congenital facial nerve palsy and crocodile tears. These are also rare conditions, but some of these congenital facial nerve palsies are also CCDDs. This is just showing the motor nuclei. As we can see, there are somatic, branchial, and visceral motor. Now, somatic ones, we know we have 3rd, 4th, 6th, and 12th broadly. And the Edinger-Westphal is a visceral motor nucleus. The branchial motor are 5th and 7th nerve. So broadly, the CCDDs can involve any nucleus, but as far as we are concerned, they tend to involve the 3rd, 4th, 6th, and 12th. But of course, other can also be involved. They are never so. They don't segregate always, they don't discriminate all the time. Now, tubulins have also been, it has been realized that these tubulins are very important for neurogenesis. These are neurogenesis, neural migration, and neural differentiation are crucial for CNS development. Microtubules are essential for such processes. Microtubules are composed of tubulin proteins, and tubulins are a multi-gene family and have been implicated in diverse neurological disorders. It's not only CFUM or eye disorders, they all have a lot of manifestations in the CNS. So the two things which are important to us here are TUB3 and TUB2B, which will be discussed under the CFUMs, and they can have a lot of CNS involvement. So one should keep in mind that when you are dealing with TUB2B or TUB3B variations, you should always look at CNS involvement, which could be there, which could be little. So an MRI may be indicated in such cases because they have a lot of associations, and systemic associations also can be there in these cases. Now, as I said that with TUB3 and TUB2B, you can have malformations of the cortical development, degenesis of the corpus callosum, corticospinal tracts, basal ganglia, hypoplasia of the oculomotor nerves. There could be microcephaly, microgyria, polymicrogyria, vocal cord paralysis, and intellectual disability. These are just few of them. The list is very long. I'm not going into the whole thing. So the idea is to say that you should always look at other CNS involvement in these cases when you are having this kind of mobility problem. Now, imaging in CCDDs, as I said, is very important. It has told unraveled a lot of things which were hidden. Now, what we do is gradient echo and turbo spin echo technique, and it is done on T2 imaging. Nerves appear as dark structures. Now, it has been shown that 1/3 of congenital third nerve palsies may show third nerve hypoplasia. And about up to 70% of the fourth nerve palsies can show fourth nerve aplasia or hypoplasia or even esophagia. And a lot of this SO group will have problems with the muscle, with the tendon, and with the trochlea. Now, this makes it very interesting because some of these end up as superior oblique palsies and some end up as Brown syndrome. So that dividing line, which way they go is very complex, but some of them go towards the superior oblique and some go towards the Brown. Now, DRS, you have CN6 nerve may be absent in type 1. It could be present in type 2, and in 3 it is variable. In Mobius, CN6 and 7 are either hypoplastic or they are absent, because Mobius is basically 6th and 7th nerve together. Because when Mobius grouped them together, the cranial nerve palsies, he grouped 6 and 7 together. That's why it is since then known as Mobius syndrome. Now, CFM3, we have CN3 hypoplasia. So CFM that way shares problems with the third nerve palsy. The problem is similar. If you have more of fibrosis, you end up with a CFM. If you have less of fibrosis, more of paresis, you end up with a third nerve palsy with aberrant innervation. So they are just two sides of the coin, one can say. Then you have synesthetic divergence, synesthetic convergence. which are usually seen at the level of the pons with the sixth nerve hypoplasia. This SD and SC can be seen in a lot of other diverse conditions like CFUMs, and I'll be showing some cases. So this is not that it is always seen in isolation. Of course, you see it in isolation also, quite often with DRS, with CFUMs and other conditions, but it usually is having other fellow travelers also. Now, genotypes, if one looks at it, they are either autosomal dominant or recessive, or can be de novo mutations. Other patterns are also possible, which have been shown to be there are PIF21A, PHOX2A, 3 TUB2B, HOXA1, CHN1, and SAL4, ROBO3. And newer insights due to advances in molecular genetics are emerging. One is that you can do serial single gene testing, multi-gene panel, or genome testing, which is quite advanced, and it is more comprehensive. So this genetic analysis is helping us a lot in these conditions, and we are getting newer and newer insights. Now, coming to the CFM, this is primarily, as we said, it's a neuropathy, not a myopathy, which was believed earlier. And ophthalmoplegia is the primary event, and the fibrosis is the secondary event. It happens because of the ophthalmoplegia. So it is the primary event is the ophthalmoplegia, and whatever fibrosis you are getting is secondary event in these cases. Now, CFMs, as we know, this CCDD, this aberrant signaling of EUMs by the neurons in the CNS. Now, there could be two mechanisms. One is with the KIF21A, that is correct axonal targeting. That means these are motor kinesins, KIF21A, they carry the cargo to particular location where it is required. So if there is a problem, then the right cargo doesn't reach the place, and there is a difficulty, and there is abnormal targeting of the axons. Then there are things like motor neuron development, as we were talking of TUB3 and TUB2B and PHOX2A. These affect the motor neuron development. So either way, either there is a motor neuron development problem, or there is wrong axonal misfiring or wrong targeting. You may end up with the same picture clinically. Now, there could be a lot of systemic associations in these conditions, like you have facial paralysis, cognitive behavioral impairment, Kalman syndrome, as we just said, with Mobius. You can have sensory motor axonal polyneuropathy, bilateral inguinal hernias, and cryptorchidism, and renal aplasia. So one needs to look at them systemically. Also, don't always concentrate on the eyes. Also look beyond the eyes, and you may find something, because he may have something, and if you just treat the eyes, and he may go later and something may go bad. So it's like renal aplasia, and all those conditions can be serious. Now, genotypes, as we said, for the CFM, there are at least 8 genetically defined strabismus syndromes. One, you have PIF21A, which can cause CFM1A and CFM3B. You have PHOX2A, which is going to cause CFM2. The TUB3 is CFM1B and CFM3A. The TUB2B will cause CFM3A, CFM3 with polymicrogyria. The Tukel syndrome, we don't know the responsible gene as yet. The inheritance is mostly autosomal dominant, other than for CFM2 and Tukel syndrome, which are autosomal recessive. Now, coming phenotypes, they can affect all or part of the oculomotor and or trochlear nerve and its innervated muscles broadly. There is great phenotypic variability. It could be unilateral or bilateral, and there is no direct genotypic and phenotypic relationship. So it is not that if you have found some genotype, it must always match with the phenotype. So there's a lot of variability which can be seen in these cases. The most important finding is restriction of the up gaze, which is almost sine qua non. The eyes just don't lift beyond the vertical line. There is usually a chin up position because the eyes are fixed in down gaze. There is ptosis, and there could also be no ptosis or even lid retraction in CFM3. So it's not a must that you must always have a ptosis. There could be an exotropia, esotropia, or even orthotropia in primary position, and with variable limitation of horizontal gaze. Horizontal gaze is also quite often limited, but there is a lot of variability. Even in the same family, you will find that two affected people will not have the same kind of horizontal gaze. There is poor Bell's and exposure keratitis. It's very important to keep in mind because they don't even blink frequently. And Bell's is poor, they can't take their eye up because of the restriction. So they are very prone for corneal damage and exposure keratitis. So that has to be taken care of. And usually they have poor or absent binocularity because there is no way they can, even with abnormal head posture, they are usually not able to achieve a binocular cooperation. Now, this is just to show some patients. This is CFUM1 family, autosomal dominant, and you have 3 generations here: the grandfather, the daughter, and the 2 daughters. On all 3, you can have a very typical classical picture. And as we see further, we'll see that they are not the same. They also have some differences. Like this is the younger child. You can see the eyes are fixed in down gaze. There is hardly, the eyes are not able to move beyond primary position in the up gaze. And there's little in up gaze, there's little lid retraction also. There is an exotropia and limitation of the movement in the horizontal plane. There is no A pattern here. Quite often you will also find that as the eyes goes in up gaze, there is convergence. We are not getting this here in this family, but that's a quite feature which we should look for, and it may help us in diagnosis also when you're looking at CPU and those conditions. Now this is showing extortion in this patient. Maybe we don't know, maybe because of tight IRs this is happening, but we observe this torsion part probably has not been well reported in CFUMs to my mind. And this is the other girl. You can again see the process is far more marked, and eyes are again, the XO is much larger here as compared to the other child. And the right eye is moving well, but the left eye is not moving as well horizontally. So there is a difference between the right eye and left eye, and as compared to the other child, there is a difference. And she is also not having convergence in up gaze, which normally is seen in these cases. They can have a fine nystagmus also, some of them, and they can also have things like synergistic divergence and all those conditions. Now look at this. Here you have this intorsion. Now that child had extorsion, this child had intorsion. Some of these CFUM patients have also been shown to have superior oblique pulses. They have been shown that their superior obliques are inserting nasal to the superior rectus, and or they are having short tendons. So maybe, I don't know, I'm just conjecturing that could it be because of the superior oblique, or we don't know why. In one child we had extorsion, and this child we have intorsion. And discs are pale. You can see the right eye clearly. And this is showing the mother. She also had a cataract which was operated. Both eyes she had cataract. And again, you don't find any convergence in up gaze. This is another sporadic child we had. He had cataract in the left eye which was operated. He sort of had a sensory deviation, kind of thing, because the vision was very poor. And he had classical sporadic presentation with CFUM1. This is showing CFUM2. The problem here is that both third and fourth nerve are gone. So the eyes are fixed into abduction, sort of being nailed into lateral canthi, and there is hardly any movement. So you can see that the eyes are almost fixed and there is hardly any movement. Process is there, but not very gross. This is coming to the CFUM3, which is, I think, a Pandora's box. Lot of conditions are there in CFUM3, which create a lot of diagnostic difficulties. Here we had, you can see this one, he has a congenital cystic eyeball, enophthalmos, and this eye is fixed in down gaze with typical coloboma and very tight IR. And he also had cryptorchidism and renal agenesis. We did his IR recession, large recession, and still he did not improve too much. So these are very difficult presentations. They could be in one eye, or in this case, as you have, that he has one eye is enophthalmic and with cystic eyeball. Now, some of these MEDs, Professor Subhash will be talking about them. I just want to say in this context that some of these MEDs can be unilateral CFUMs with variable IR fibrosis. Those which have IR fibrosis, some of them could be falling in this category. There has been, and some with ptosis and SR underaction could be falling in CCDDs, because this could be the paretic component. And some MEDs also have paresis as well as IR restriction. So all those combinations are there, depending upon how much paresis and how much restriction has come in. Now, congenital MED as CCDD, this could be unilateral CFUM3 because may be associated with MGP, facial palsy, and cortical malformations. Variable fibrosis of the IR and SR underaction is there. The hypoplastic oculomotor nerve could be hypoplastic, and CFUM3 with TUB3 pathogenic variants has been reported in a family. So some association has been shown that this could be with TUB3. Association could be there with MED. Now workup, we need to do relevant history, family history, And systemic evaluation, motility evaluation, AHP, we need to take into account force reduction test, visual acuity, amblyopia, and refractive errors. One thing I forgot to say, they have very gross cylinders. So one has to be very careful. They can have a lot of amblyopia, and cylinders have to be corrected. Like these two children had about -4 cylinders. LPS function, of course, has to be assessed, Bell's phenomena and corneal exposure. MRI brain and orbits to document status of the cranial nerves and EM thickness and insertions. They could also have abnormal insertions of the nerves. Photographic documentation and linkage analysis should be done. Now, treatment is non-surgical, can be refractive error correction by spectacles or by contact lenses. Amblyopia management, as I said, is very important because quite often they have cylindrical errors and there is no binocular cooperation by and large, so they will have amblyopia. And lubrication of ocular surface is very, very, very important. Now, surgical treatment to indications are to improve AHP, to align the eyes in primary position, improve motility. EUM and EUM insertions anomalies may be encountered. So large resections have to be done in these cases, but rarely if there is a need, you can also do resections, but they are not the standard procedure, but they can also be contemplated. So there is nothing sort of sign that you cannot do it. Ptosis correction should be by frontalis ring, and under correction is desirable because of the exposure problems. Now, surgical challenges are that surgery is difficult due to extreme fibrosis of the extraocular muscles and abnormal insertions. Decisions need to be much larger than conventional. Orbital bands and safety could be encountered, and there's poor Bell's. Ptosis surgery may lead to exposure. Results are modest. Multiple procedures may be required, about 2.5, 2.3 per patient. Now, to conclude, CFM is a rare 1 in 2.25, heritable, sporadic, prone for misdiagnosis, currently restrictive ophthalmoplegia with a vertical gaze, with or without ptosis. The surgical treatment is challenging. Results are modest. Look for systemic and ocular associations in these cases. Now, I'll be talking, Dr. Rohit is not with us. He was busy with some presentation. So I'll be talking about Browns and SOPs also in continuation with this. I'll take another 5 minutes. Now, Browns, as we said, these are both two sides of the same coin, and these have been known to be associated with SOP and vice versa, DRS and ptosis, conjunctival ptosis. So you have the same patient with the right Browns. The eye is not able to elevate well, and abduction it is elevating well, but there is no aberrant innervation in this patient. Now you look at this patient, it is right Browns and left class 1 SOP. The same child, as I was saying, that they are the two sides of the coin. In one eye he has Browns and the other eye he has SOP. So this can happen depending upon how tendon behaves, how this neural thing develops in the trochlea muscle and the tendon. Now this is showing on the tilt, it is coming on the right tilt, the hypertropia, and this you can see on the right side, you can see the tendon in Brown's eye is so tight and so tough and so strong as compared to the other side. We did a tuck on this side and did not be, because this was very tight tendon on the Brown side eye. And on the SO side, you find that it is very transparent kind of tendon. You can see through the hooks through the tendon and lax tendon. Now this is showing another SOP. So Browns and SOP should be considered together. Now this just shows that if there is conjunctival absence of the trochlear nerve, it may either go for superior oblique palsy or it can go for Brown syndrome, depending upon if there is a paradoxical innervation of the, or if there is no paradoxical innervation. Now, if there is none, then usually they may go for superior oblique hypoplasia and tendon laxity and superior oblique, conjunctival superior oblique palsy. And if there is aberrant innervation with the third nerve, that is either the medial rectus or the inferior rectus, they will end up with Brown syndrome. That is why the two features which I want to point out, that when the Brown patients, a small number of them, of course, when they adduct, there is downshoot and widening of the aperture. This is because of the aberrant innervation from the third nerve, which is classically seen in some cases of these Browns, not that all of them have. So this shows that this is a CCDD rather just a congenital disorder. So both ways it can happen, either you have SOP or you have a Brown syndrome. So we should keep that in mind. Thank you. Now the next talk will be given by Professor Pradeep Sharma. He will be talking of the commonest CCDD, that is Duane's retraction syndrome. And Professor Pradeep has done very extensive work on DRS, and he is the master of his subject. So let us hear him. It will be a treat to hear him talk on the DRS. Professor Pradeep, please.
Thank you, Professor Pandey. It's a pleasure to be such a distinguished group of the congenital cranial dysnervation disorders, which is a specialized thing that we talk today. I have no financial disclosures to make on this subject. As Dr. Pandey has said, DRS happens to be the most common congenital cranial dysnervation disorder. Clinically, just to start, all of us know that it is a condition which may present as an esotropic condition in which on adduction there is a retraction of the globe because of co-contraction and abduction is limited, or it may be an exo-DRS in which there may be an exotropia in the primary position, but again on attempted adduction, there is a co-contraction causing a retraction and a marked upshoot and downshoot. Duane's retraction syndrome may be also known better as a co-contraction syndrome. It was first described by Hugh in 1879, later by Stilling and Turk in 1899. And however, it was later popularized by Alexander Duane, and that's why it's known by his name. And it may be still better to call Stilling-Turk-Duane syndrome. The frequency in the strabismus patients is about 1 to 4%. It is more commonly seen in females, about 60%. 80% of the cases are unilateral, and with 2/3 having a left predominance. Now, these two facts are very interesting, which have now been alluded to by Dr. Parsa's work. And DRS is included in a condition as we have talked about. What is that interesting work that I was talking about? By Parsa and Robert, they have shown that it is thromboembolism which is causing the Duane syndrome and other similar congenital cranial dysnervation disorders which are occurring in the 4 to 8 weeks of embryogenesis. The culprits are, one of them are thalidomide and misoprostol, which has been described by Marilyn Miller's work, and higher estrogen level and inflammation of venous thromboembolic events, plus the right to left shunting affects the left carotid artery more commonly. And this is the reason why we are seeing more in the females and more is the left preponderance appears to be there. Now, if we learn from this article, we will be able to understand the basic embryogenesis and the cause of Duane's and conditions like malnutrition, dehydration, alcohol, infections, trauma, ionizing radiations, antiphospholipid syndrome, and other autoimmune disorders which are affecting the pregnant lady during the first 4 to 8 weeks of antenatal development could be the cause of Duane's retraction syndrome. So maybe in future we are going able to prevent or reduce the incidence of this condition. When we do the imaging, we can see the missing 6th nerve. The bottom picture shows in a control both the side 6th nerve is there, whereas in the upper diagram you can see the missing 6th nerve on the right side in a case of a right exo-DRS. Huber has very nicely shown. So now we know it's a primary dysnervation here is involving the 6th nerve. It's a hypoplastic 6th nerve or hypoplastic nucleus of 6th nerve. And the secondary dysnervation is the abnormal innervation which is happening because of the nerve 3. He described 3 types of Duane's, the Huber type 1, which is 78%. And as you can see by the electromyography, it is seen that on abduction, the lateral rectus doesn't fire at all. In the primary position, again, the lateral rectus is not having much of innervation. And on the adduction, both the lateral rectus, the upper tracing, and the medial rectus are co-contracting. Now, this is the reason why there is a retraction and sometimes upshoot and downshoots. A type 2 Duane's retraction syndrome is 7% of population, and this is having some normal LR activity. But in the adduction, there is again a co-contraction, which is paradoxic innervation of the lateral rectus. The type 3, which is still less common, is type 3 is about 15%, and this would be seen when the LR and MR both are firing all the time during adduction, abduction, and in primary position. Dysnervations in DRS are a situation in which the 6th nerve is missing and the 3rd nerve is playing in place of that. Similarly, the synergistic divergence, there is an innervation which is instead of the lateral rectus is coming from the medial rectus, and that causes a synergistic divergence. The associations in the eye which can be seen are in the form of nystagmus, microphthalmos, but primarily which one examining person should always look into is crocodile tears, gastro-lacrimal reflex. That means when the child is eating or swallowing, he is tearing in his eyes. The other thing which may be easily picked up is the Marcus gun jaw winking phenomenon, which may be associated with Duane's retraction syndrome. And then in the fundus, the choroidal coloboma, hypoplasia, and morning glory disc can be seen. The systemic associations are in the form of cervical spina bifida, cleft palate, facial anomalies, perceptive deafness, malformations of the external ear, anomalies of hand and feet, and cardiac anomalies. Now, these things are the reasons that we see in these syndromes, all these association of the systemic that we talked about. In the common syndromes are the golden hour, the Klippel-Feil, Wilder-Wank, Holt-Oram, Okihiro, DRRS, IVIC, or the oculo-otoradial Okihiro syndrome. Now, these are in detail, if you want to see, these are the associations, but these can be there. A Wilder-Wank is actually a combination of Klippel-Feil with deafness and polydactyly, whereas a Holt-Oram has got associated cardiac anomalies. So, coming to the clinical part, the paradoxic innervation of the lateral rectus is the basic culprit or problem which we need to address in our management. So, in our management plan, what we should look in, according to me, is these 4 points. First is look whether it's an EXO, exo, or orthotropia. Secondly, look for how significant is the co-contraction. This you will see on the basis of the retraction, which is the slightest sign, and marked upshoot and downshoot means there is a severe co-contraction. Third point is the force reduction test, which can be seen intraoperatively for both medial rectus and lateral rectus. And the fourth point is the LR activity. How much LR activity is there? Is it normal, subnormal, or not there at all? Now, in ESO-DRS, when we are seeing FDT which is mildly tight for MR or almost absent, but there is a minimal co-contraction, then a simple LMR recession of 4 mm. Mind you, you need to do very little MR recession in cases of ESO-DRS. If you do a little extra MR recession in the presence of a more moderate to severe co-contraction, it will lead to an iatrogenic synergistic divergence. And this usually when you suspect preoperatively, then you should combine the lateral rectus recession with a Y split whenever we are doing an MR recession. So this is an important take-home message. So in ESO-DRS, minimal MR recession as required for the FDT. If it is tight, LR recession with Y split should always be added to if there is a significant co-contraction. If there is a very tight LR, a periosteal fixation may be done, but usually in ESO-DRS we do not see this. SRT, VRT and all can only be done if the co-contraction has been taken care of or neutralized. So if you have an ESO-DRS in which the minimal co-contraction is there and FDT for MR is slight, then LSRT alone may be done to improve the abduction and correct the esotropia. So this is a planning algorithm which you can find in the Indian Journal of Ophthalmology, which we have published, which can be used for the planning the surgeries. People have talked about doing an LR resection, which is traditionally contraindicated. Ipsilateral LR should not be resected. This is what the classical books talk about. But a group of Stephen Kraft has said that you may do a LR resection of small amounts, but I would say one should better avoid that. Management strategies in EXO-DRS could be Y splitting with LR recession, large or supramaximal LR recessions, or a periosteal fixation of LR or an extirpation of LR. So which one do you do and when? It will depend upon the primary position exotropia, the co-contraction severity, and third is the LR activity, whether it is normal or absent. If the normal LR activity is there, as you can see in this diagram of the patient, that abduction is almost normal. There is an exotropia in the primary position and the retraction is quite a bit. So in such a situation, one should do an LR, that is the left lateral rectus recession of about 12 millimeters. In this case, we did with a large Y split of 21 millimeters. And as you can see, the retraction and the upshoot and downshoot both will be taken care of. Mind you, the retraction is corrected by the recession of the lateral rectus, and the upshoots and downshoots are taken care of by the Y split. Little lateral rectus recession usually in homeopathic doses is of no use in EXO-DRS cases. You have to do good amount of LR recession, and if the FDT is very tight and there is no normal LR activity, I would suggest doing a lateral rectus periosteal fixation to take away the lateral rectus which is having a paradoxic innervation altogether, and then the missing abduction can be improved upon by a partial vertical rectus transposition. Adjustable partial VRT can be done to give more controlled abduction improvement, and this video shows you how much improvement can be there in the right eye which was involved. The abduction is restored in spite of the periosteal fixation of the LR. This is a planning algorithm for EXO-DRS cases, which again you can find in IJO. Ortho-DRS is a little more difficult game to tackle because the challenge is to correct the upshoots and downshoots, which may be significant, but still maintain the orthotropia in the primary position. Many strabismologists may avoid doing ortho-DRS cases for this reason. But when you have to do it, you should always do an adjustable MR recession or a controlled MR recession with an LR Y split so that you can retain the ortho positioning in the primary position as well as correct the problem that is there. To improve abductions in exo-DRS, nowadays we are doing a modified Nishida procedure, and this is showing you the pre-op and the post-op of a girl who had a lateral rectus Y split done, and after that we have done a modified Nishida to improve the abduction. Even an inferior rectus transposition can be done, preferably in cases which have a marked upshoot or a primary position hypertropia. This is what was done, and you can see the improvement in the control of the upshoot which was there. So to conclude my talk, ESO-DRS cases, MR recession alone or with LR recession with Y split should be done. In exo-DRS, you may do a large LR recession or an LR recession with a wide Y split or a periosteal fixation, and to improve abduction, you may do a PVRT or a SRT or IRT, depending upon the pre-operative hypertropia that is there. And once you have neutralized the paradoxic LR activity. In ortho-DRS cases, one has to maintain the ortho position, so do an adjustable MR and LR recession with Y split. Thank you all.
Thank you, Professor Pradeep Sharma, for a very interesting talk, and you have very extensive experience, and DRS is very challenging situation. So I think every DRS is a new challenge, and no two DRS cases are similar. So one can't have a uniform strategy for all the cases. So one has to tailor for every patient.
Individual.
You have to have a strategy which you have to tailor for each patient. So there is no uniform logarithm you can apply to all the cases.
Yeah, that's why the algorithm is required, that you can see the various presentations that a patient is having.
That's true. That's true. That's very true.
Sir, what is your experience regarding vertical Duane's?
Vertical Duane's retraction syndrome may be there, which is having an abnormal innervation, and that is causing. These are fortunately much rare, and in such cases we should do an FDT and find out which is the tight muscle and release that, and the co-contraction which is happening, like for example there is a tight IR and then the superior rectus acts against it, it causes a slippage. So that can be done on the basis of the force resistance tests which are to be done in the intraoperative phase.
Yeah.
There, primarily the deviations occurring in the vertical directions.
So, any other question, or shall we pass on to the next talk, Dr. Subhash? Actually, Dr. Shukla is also not here. He could not come, so I will be covering his part also. So I will cover his part now. Then Dr. Subhash will talk about MED, and then I will talk about GPPS. So I think, can I start my talk on third nerve palsies?
Okay, sir.
No problem. Please go ahead, doctor.
Thank you. Now, some of these, is it okay now? Visible, the screen?
We can't see your screen, doctor.
Oh. Is it okay now?
Perfect. Perfect.
Thank you so much. We have been traditionally thinking that third nerve palsies are third nerve palsies, and they don't cross borders, cross sorts with the CCDDs. I just want to show some cases with a lot of aberrant disinnervation to show that third nerve palsies we should also look at as CCDDs. And I said earlier, about 20-25% of the cases of the third nerve palsies have been shown to have hypoplastic oculomotor nerve. So these are not that they don't come into the CCDD basket. Now this is, I'll be showing 3 patients. These all 3 have been published. Now this is an 8-year-old boy presented with poor vision and outward deviation of the right eye since birth. As you can see, this looks like right third nerve palsy. He has got exopropia of 70 prism diopters and hypopropia of about 20. There is, you can see, slight head tilt to the right. and there was no gross restriction to the elevation on FDT in this eye. Now this is showing the, if you can look at the, if you can see the motility, there is hypotropia, and as in the side gazes, as he goes to the left gaze, the right, there is a synergistic divergence. The eye is diverging and probably slightly going up in this in the side gazes. And as the child is looking up, the right eye is not elevating, but it is adducting. So what classically is seen in say CFM or third nerve palsies, because of aberrant innervation, there is an ESO in up gaze, and of course the eye is not moving much. If you look at in the down gaze also, the eye is not moving. So it is not like CFM, because eye should have been fixed in down gaze, which is not there. It is not moving much in down gaze also. And when he looks into the this thing right side, the other eye goes diverges and goes up also. So there is vertical as well as horizontal divergence, which can be seen in this child. I will be showing a video also, and on tilt it doesn't come as positive. Now this is a small video just to show the nystagmus and divergence. Now there was no nystagmus in the primary position, but as he looks this side, there is a jerk nystagmus beating to this thing right side. And when he look this, now look here. Now this eye is going up and that eye is going down. There is a torsional nystagmus in the right eye, which is there. So he had both jerk pendular nystagmus in the left eye and a torsional nystagmus in the right eye. The right eye nystagmus could be because of the INC involvement, and the left could be because of the vestibular nuclei involvement. That is my conjecture, of course, because there is no way to be very decisive. Now this is showing, you can see that there is intorsion in the right eye, and left eye torsion is normal. Now intorsion in right eye, one may say that this is because of the fourth nerve, intact fourth nerve, one may reason that. But now look at what happens when the child is trying to look up, because in this case we could take a photograph because the eye is not actually elevating. And you see that this right eye has it has gone into very severe extortion, and the left eye has intorted. So this only happens, this is classical conjugate torsion, which we see in ocular tilt reaction. So this is something like a phasic conjugate torsion, which I think has not been described in literature, which we saw in this patient, that show that there is involvement of the autolytic pathways along with the third nerve nucleus. And the synergistic divergence could be because of the involvement of the at the level of the sixth nerve. So you have that kind of synergistic divergence also. Now, are we dealing with the pupillary third nerve, or it is CFM3? Now, for the third nerve, we have a fellow eye is affected. There is a gaze evoked nystagmus, as I showed you, that there is a torsional nystagmus in the right eye, and there is also a vestibular, central vestibular nystagmus in the left eye. Though in PP it was not there. Normally the vestibular nystagmus is also there in primary position, but here it was not seen. And there is disinnervation and aberrant innervation in, and there was also right MR hypoplasia on MRI. There is synergistic divergence and conjugate gaze evoked torsion. Now these features are in addition to the third nerve palsy. So once you, in this kind of presentation, tells us that these third nerve palsies could be CCDD, rather just third nerve palsy. Now this gaze evoked nystagmus, as I said, this is because of the conjugate torsion, because of the ocular tilt reaction, what we classically see there. Now these are the graviceptive pathways. I don't want to go into detail. The vestibular nuclei, and as it is crossing to the other side, so the third nerve on the right side and probably the vestibular nuclei on the left side, some problem might be there. We can't say. On MRI, we got only MR hypoplasia. Our MRI was not very good, I think. They didn't catch any other finding. Even third nerve, they could not catch, unfortunately. Now, nystagmus, I said this could be vertical because of INC involvement in the torsional nystagmus in the right eye, and horizontal jerk nystagmus because of the involvement of the vestibular nuclei, the central vestibular nystagmus, maybe likely. This is just showing the areas which could be affected from the vestibular nuclei till the INC, and the third nerve and the fourth nerve are on the way. They are neighbors. They are lying close together, so they can be affected by each other. So, and the SD was because of the involvement of the sixth and third nerve, likely somewhere. So it is a very complex presentation that way. And he also had cryptorchidism and renal aplasia, which was again interesting because this had also systemic connotations in the form of renal aplasia, which is seen with acrorenal syndromes, Okihiro, Holt-Oram, DURS, and PAX2 and SAL4 mutations. So we don't know the genetic part, we could not do. So this was a novel presentation, which was a third nerve with a lot of CNS involvement. Now this is another child, which we can see here that this eye is, there's a lid retraction and the eye is almost nailed into abduction. Now, when the child is looking to the, in fact, this picture is getting cut because of this display. Now, as he's looking to the opposite side, there is a synesthetic divergence and this eye is going a bit, if you can see, it's going down. In that child, the eye was going up. In this child, the right eye is going down. Both are right eyes affected. And this one, the eye is going down along with this synesthetic divergence. Now, this is a small video which will show that with the, there is a MGP which is linked to the, there is eye goes in when he opens his jaw, and once he moves sideways, there is activation of the medial rectus. So with what we see in Marcus gun, and now see here, this eye is dipped down much, and there is a synesthetic divergence. So these are the features which are very atypical in this patient, and this also tells us that this was also a third nerve, and this is third one, which was published in the archives. This was a left side control third nerve with pupillary involvement. Those two did not involve pupil. This one had pupillary involvement also. And when she presses over her eye, you will see that the lid elevates. There is no change in the ocular movements, but there is elevation of the lid. And this remains for about 1 minute or so. And then see, the lid has elevated without any effort, and there is no improvement in the motility. Now this will remain for about 40 seconds or so, and then this is going to again fall back, and then once she does it again, this again happens. So this can only be explained by, there is a Mueller's muscle which is known to act like spindle for the LPS. So either this is yoked to the fifth nerve as proprioception going to the mesencephalic nucleus of the fifth nerve, and there is some innervation to the LPS, or it is through the Mueller's, the sympathetic system, that this is the LPS is being fired, because it is, the LPS cannot be fired by just touch. Now she'll just touch again, and you will see that again this has taken about 30-40 seconds, and the lid has dropped again. Now when she touches again, she will again have that. I think you can wait, we can show. I think we are running short of time, and this video is about 2 minutes. Yeah.
It's totally fine, Dr. Pramod. We are very good in time.
So we are in time. So this again, she does that, and you can see that lid elevates almost to normal, and there is very little blinking in her. The other eye doesn't blink, you know. This is again something peculiar, and there is no change in the motility and no pupillary change. Only the lid is affected. So that means only LPS is firing because of either Mueller's spindle effect, or it is because of the fifth nerve innervation, which is going to the mesencephalic nucleus in the midbrain. We don't know, we published this in archives in 2010, and this is 3 cases I have shown which show that the third nerve pulses can have lot of disinnervation, and we should look at them in a slightly, I mean, we should look at them differently. We should also think of, and third nerve pulses have also been shown to have a lot of systemic associations, vital third nerve pulses. So it's not that they are always isolated. So MRI, maybe some cases you may find a lot of interesting findings. So one should keep that in mind, that if there's a third nerve, you could also have a CCDD. Now carry home message is that there is more to third nerve pulses than meets the eye. Think of a CCDD while evaluating third nerve pulses. Thank you. Now with this, I will request Professor Subhash Dadia to talk upon congenital MED. Dr. Subhash has a lot of experience on MEDs. He has done extensive work, and he'll be speaking about congenital MEDs. Dr. Subhash, please.
Thank you, sir. Are my slides visible?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, sir.
I'm a novice, you are a professional.
No, sir, my son is helping. I am not.
Dr. Subhash, your video is turned off. We can't see you.
Slides are visible or not?
Yes,
Slides
slides
are
are visible.
Okay, it does not matter whether I am visible or not. The
Yes,
slides.
yes. A very valid point.
So basically, I will be speaking on monocular elevation deficit. So these are some of the photographs. So basically, it is defined as inability to elevate paretic eye from any position of gaze, provided ductions are normal in all other positions of gaze, and it may be due to paresis of superior rectus and inferior oblique with ptosis, or it may be superior rectus palsy of long standing. Initially, the term was double elevator palsy, which was coined by Dunlop in 1942. It may be congenital or acquired. It may be paretic or restrictive. It may be supranuclear. But now, MED is more accurate term because paralysis of both muscles independently and supranuclear lesions, they can also lead to impaired unilateral gaze palsy. So now we use the term MED more oftenly. Causes, it could be congenital due to supranuclear defects. It may be due to paresis of the superior rectus. It may be due to inferior rectus restriction. Neonatal hypoxia. In acquired cases, CVS diseases, midbrain tumors, pineocytoma, ectopic neuromas, metastatic tumors, sarcoidosis, infections, and in our setting, cysticercosis is an important cause of acquired MED. This is ultrasound picture of a patient of a MED in which cysticercosis was a cause. It is classified into three types. Type 1, where inferior rectus restriction is a prominent feature. In type 2, the weakness of elevators is a prominent feature, and type 3 is a combined type. So clinically, there is limitation of elevation above midline, both in abduction and adduction. There is usually hypotropia of the involved eye. There is presence of ptosis and pseudotosis. Usually there is chin elevation. Most of the cases it is unilateral, though some cases may have bilateral MED. Marcus gun jaw winking phenomena is seen in approximately 25% of the patients. This is clinical photograph of one of the patients having MED. So basically, it is very important to ask history of onset, and if sequence of events is not clear, then presence of amblyopia suggests congenital etiology. We must look previous photographs, and in acquired cases, there will be history of neurological symptoms, past medical histories, general systemic symptoms. In type 1 MED, we will have positive FDT, normal FGT, normal scades, deeper lower lid folds, and Bell's phenomena will be negative. In type 2, negative FDT, reduced saccade velocities, reduced force generation, and intact Bell with absent scades above the midline. Absent scades above the midline suggest a supranuclear lesion. We have to differentiate acquired DEP from the congenital DEP that is required for the management. If there is acute acquired diplopia in upgaze, ptosis is not a very prominent feature of acquired DEP. Pupillary anomalies, convergence weakness, and neurological symptoms, if they are present, they point towards acquired MED. Various differential diagnoses are Brown syndrome, vertical Duane's, congenital fibrosis of inferior rectus, congenital absence of SR or IO, abnormal insertions of inferior rectus and superior rectus, and third nerve palsy. So basically, if we have to differentiate it from Brown's, because in Brown's it will be worse on the adduction and the deviation improves on abduction, while in MED there is both in the elevation is worse both in adduction and abduction. Then tight superior oblique and presence of patent strabismus points towards the Brown syndrome. Then in vertical domains, there will be globe retraction in down gaze. Congenital absence of superior rectus and inferior rectus is usually associated with craniofacial anomalies, and these abnormal insertions can be diagnosed on ASOCT or imaging, and it is very difficult to differentiate it from superior divisional third nerve palsy. Then acquired DEP could be due to thyroid orbitopathy, where there are typical clinical features of the thyroid orbitopathy, that is bilateral involvement, proptosis, and other signs. Myasthenia gravis is another entity which must be differentiated. Then variable ptosis, presence of variable ptosis and other features, they differentiate it from the MED. Orbital floor fractures can be identified by history of trauma and imaging. Then orbital cellulitis and inflammatory diseases can be differentiated by presence of tender globes. This is one of the patient of ocular myasthenia gravis which presented like MED. Then what are the indications for surgery in MED? Significant abnormal head posture in primary position, significant vertical deviation in primary position, contracted binocular fields, presence of diplopia in primary gaze. These are some of the indications for surgery. In most of the patients, we have to do only observation, because with limited head changes, orthophoria can be maintained, and treatment for MED is surgical and only surgical. Goals of surgery are to achieve cosmetically acceptable deviation in primary position. We want to increase field of binocular single vision. It is very important to tell that surgery will not cure MED, and it is very important to tell the patient relatives that more than one surgery is required in this sort of patients, and basically ptosis surgery should be done after strabismus surgery, because most of these patients, they present to our oculoplasty colleagues and they come with the problem of ptosis and they want only ptosis surgery. So we have to tell them that ptosis surgery will be done only after the strabismus surgery. Various surgical procedures have been described, and optical surgical treatment for MED remains controversial, and the best thing is treatment should be according to the type of DEP, and type 1, which is more common type of MED, recession of the involved inferior rectus, is the procedure of choice. In type 2 MED, NEPS procedure is a well-established and commonly practiced procedure. However, NEPS procedure has certain drawbacks, because patient loses some abduction and adduction, and effectivity of the procedure decreases if the deviation is more than 25 prism diopters. These are some of the steps of the NEPS procedure, where we the medial rectus and lateral rectus, they are shifted towards the superior rectus. Then esophageectomy and vertical muscle recessions have been found to be effective in congenital DEP in one of the Chinese study. Then Sneer et al. Recommends NEPS procedure with posterior fixation sutures. And if this MED is associated with horizontal deviations, and in these sort of patients, most of the parents, they don't want surgery in the normal fellow eye. So modified NEPS procedure, in which there is splitting of the superior and inferior half of medial and lateral rectus, where upper part is used for correction of the vertical deviation and lower part is used for horizontal deviation, is procedure of choice. Then some authors, they do vertical muscle surgeries in the form of inferior rectus recession and resection of the superior rectus, and some do contralateral superior rectus recession. However, recession of the inferior rectus, then NEPS procedure, these are the two most commonly performed procedures for MED. This is preoperative photograph of one of the patient. This is postoperative photograph of the same. This is preoperative photograph of another patient. This is postoperative photograph immediately after the surgery. You see orthophoria. Then this is a preoperative photograph of a patient with right MED. Then in the upper photograph, this is after the squint surgery, and finally the patient is after bilateral sling surgery. So when to intervene for ptosis, minimally you should wait 6 months after squint surgery, because magnitude for vertical correction increases with time following NEPS procedure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Suhas, for a very informative talk. How much inferior rectus recession do you do more than 6 millimeter also, or you like to remain within 6 millimeter?
Sir, within 6 or 6.5.
Because if you do more than 6, then usually you have an exo in down gaze. So if you are doing more than that, you should also place them slightly medially.
Yes.
Otherwise,
Yes.
an exo pattern. And
I think we should not cross the safe limits. If we cross the safe limits, then it is bound to cause some of the anomalies like lid changes or the effect on horizontal deviations.
And SR recession in the other eye you don't do, like some people also.
Sir, basically, I believe in very simple procedures, and I don't believe in complicating the issues. So if the deviation is usually up to 15 prism diopter and there is FDT is positive for inferior rectus, so I would like to go for recession of the inferior rectus. And if in type 2 MED, I would like to go for the NEPS procedure. And if the deviation is more than 25 prism diopters, then I can combine NEPS two-stage procedure. First do the NEPS and then go for the inferior rectus recession. But in the literature, these various techniques have been described by various authors, and it is basically tailored approach and individual surgeon's choice.
Yeah, that's true. And some patients don't even agree for the surgery on the other eye, because if this eye is amblyopic, having poor vision, that's another reason they say, okay, do only on this eye. That's another issue, I think, because patient may not even consent.
Yes,
for
sir.
Doing surgery on the other eye. So it's,
yes. It is very tricky situation, sir. It is very tricky situation. And in our setting, most of the patients, actually they report either during the marriage time or
they just want correction, and
they report late because lot of myths they are prevailing regarding strabismus, that it will be corrected with time, or so basically there is need for awareness campaign.
Different scenario. Thank you, Dr. Suhas, so much for a very informative and nice presentation. If there are no questions, then I will move on to my last talk, that is on AGPPS. Shall I move ahead?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Last talk we have.
Yes, sir. Unshare कर दिया ना.
On the right hand side, sir.
It's all black here. I don't know what's happening. It's all black.
Okay, wait. Just reshare the screen again.
Share the screen again. Shall I close it and share it again?
Yeah, share it again. I have stopped it. You share it again. Can you see the screen now?
I can see the presentation, but it's not coming there. On my screen, it is coming.
Yeah, even we can see it.
So shall I go ahead? Shall I proceed, or there is a problem? Because
There is no problem. If you just need to put it in the presentation mode, which is right up there, which is written slideshow. Slideshow is written there. Can you see slideshow?
I'm gonna stop sharing. You're not reading.
There's something blocking it. I hope there's nothing blocking. Oh. This black panel is coming. I don't know why there's a black panel which is coming here, and which is blocking the panel which is behind.
Can you see the presentation on your screen, sir?
I can see the presentation.
Okay, then go ahead, present it. We can see it. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'll be talking about horizontal gaze palsy with progressive scoliosis. This is a rare condition. About 100 or slightly more than 100 cases might have been described. And as I was telling in my first presentation, that this can be missed if one does not look at it carefully. Is it okay, Dr. Subhash? Can you hear me?
Yes, Dr. Subhash is on mute. Just a minute.
Sir, it is visible and we can hear you very well, but it is not on the presentation mode.
I don't know how to do it presentation.
Doctor, can you see file and home at the option or at the top? File, home.
Sir, next. Move slightly on the right.
Move your cursor a bit. You're on mute.
It is okay, sir. It is okay. It is visible.
I would request you to unmute. Dr. Pramod, you're on mute. Dr. Pramod, you're speaking something, but you're on mute. I would request you to unmute yourself first.
Sir, unmute yourself, sir. You are, yeah.
Abhi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Now the slides are not. Now it's not coming properly.
Yeah, we can see it. Go ahead, sir.
HGPPS can have three. This is a horizontal gaze palsy with progressive scoliosis. There is a gaze palsy of the conjugate gaze for saccades, smooth pursuit, and VOR. There is a vertical gaze is intact. There is convergence is intact, and there is a pendular nystagmus quite often in these cases, and there could be a generalized hypotony also in these cases, which one should look for. Scoliosis is very important feature, which comes usually late by about 2 to 2.5 years. So if you have a young child, you may not find any scoliosis, and there's a lot of variation. Some may have less, some may have more, and there's a lot of radiological features which are classically seen in these cases, like pontine hypoplasia, butterfly pattern, and a tented fourth ventricle. I'll be showing them as we proceed further in the patients. Now the genotype is ROBO3. About 24 mutations have been described, and the problem is because of the abnormal crossing of the long track fibers in the medulla. They are not able to cross. Normally the CNS works like crossing of fibers because balance is very important, and for balance we need crossing. So our CNS works on the basis of crossing of fibers. So what is happening, because these fibers can't find their way because of ROBO3 problem, so they are not able to move to the medial longitudinal fasciculus and ascend up. So there is no horizontal gaze. Otherwise, convergence pathway is different. So convergence is retained. So ROBO3 does neural migration, motor neuron development. So all these functions will be affected because once there is a problem with the ROBO3 gene. Now, there are two types have been described. The common one is AGPPS autosomal recessive, which is on chromosome 11 short arm. And there is another one which is rarely seen, which is caused by mutation in the DCC gene on chromosome 18 short arm. So this is something few cases have been described. Most important is the one on the chromosome 11. Now, inheritance, as I said, is autosomal recessive, and sporadic also cases have been described. I'll be showing one inheritance and one sporadic, both cases. Now, this is, I'm showing a family. You have parents which were not affected, unfortunately, and we had 3 daughters and 3 sons. All 3 daughters are affected here and all 3 sons are not affected. So it looks like sex-linked dominant kind of pattern. It's very peculiar and very interesting. Now you look at this 3-year, somehow this panel is coming and you can't see the picture. Now this is a 3-year-old female child, as we say, they're all females. There's inward deviation of both the eyes since birth. There is horizontal conjugate gaze is absent for saccade, smooth pursuit, and vestibulo-ocular. There is up gaze restriction also in this patient, and there is convergence in up gaze, which I said doesn't happen in AGPPS. There is an esotropia, and there is right hypertropia of about 10 PD, and upper lid retraction and pendular nystagmus, which is commonly seen in these cases. So what is atypical here is that there is an up gaze limitation. Now, is it because of the pretectal features which were here in this patient, or it is some kind of CFUM variant which is getting into it? So it is a mixed presentation probably. Now, he also had a very generalized hypotony in all over. You can see how he can fold his limbs, and hyper flexible joints, unable to hold her neck. She is 3-year-old and she cannot hold her neck. And as I said, there was no scoliosis in this child till now. So it's a novel presentation, CFM3 or AGPPS mixed phenotype maybe. Now look at her sisters. This is an 11-year-old sister, progressive scoliosis since the age of 3.5 years, and there are no ocular complaints with her actually. You can see there is growth and mental retardation. There is scoliosis with convexity to the right side. All these 2 girls, all 3 I'll be showing, they will all have convexity to the right side of scoliosis. Now this is showing that you can see the motility. There is vertical gaze is intact and there is no horizontal gaze either way. So there is total lack of horizontal gaze. They also have a fine pendular nystagmus, most of them. And this is showing the pupils. You can see there is some anisocoria. The left pupil seems to be slightly larger and there is some kind of iris hypoplasia. The pattern is not very grossly seen as you see in normal people. So some iris hypoplasia, some pupillary anisocoria is there in this child. This is showing the fundus. The photographs are not very good, but there is intorsion in both the eyes. Some disc pallor, but intorsion is definitely which can be seen. And this is the 3rd child, 14-year-old girl, sister. There is scoliosis since the age of 4 years. No ocular complaints with her. Consulted orthopedic department for scoliosis, and ocular findings were totally overlooked in her. Now here again you have growth retardation, scoliosis with the convexity to the right side. As I said earlier, they all have right side scoliosis for some reason, and there is no Menake till now. She is about 14, so there is the development is also delayed. This is showing her motility. Again, you find very symmetrical vertical gaze is intact, and there is no horizontal gaze. Some of them have convergence substitution for horizontal gaze, which we don't find here in this group of patients. Here again, you find some anisocoria. The left pupil is slightly larger than the right, and similar iris pattern, some kind of iris hypoplasia, and not very good crepes and claviculae you can see. Now this is showing very gross intorsion. Now why it happens, I am not able to say. Both patients had gross intorsion, as we can see here. This one is very gross. Now the seminal features in these 3, there is a bilateral horizontal gaze palsy with for saccade, smooth pursuit, and vestibulo-ocular reflex. The intact convergence, there is no convergence substitution for horizontal gaze. There is anisocoria, disc pallor, and intorsion. Mental and growth retardation, generalized hypotonia. In all 3, it was present. There is a progressive scoliosis and signs of CFUM or pretectal syndrome in child number 1. He was not very cooperative, and these patients were lost to follow up after some time because they thought we are not benefiting them. we did get an MRI done on them, which I think yeah, this is the MRI. You can see that there is a gross pontine hypoplasia. If I can show with the cursor, you see how hypoplastic the pons is, and tenting of the fourth ventricle. See how big this has become, and you have quite often facial colliculi cannot be seen in the floor of the fourth ventricle, and there is a butterfly pattern on the medulla. That is, there is a cleft in the medulla because the fibers have not crossed. So there is a cleft in the medulla. So these are the prominent signs which you may find on a GPPS on neuroimaging. Yeah. Now, linkage analysis, we had sent samples for blood and saliva samples to the Boston Children's Hospital to Ingles lab, and they did not find any ROBO3 abnormality in this cohort, but they are still looking at it. The process is still on. I don't know latest what they have done, but initially they did not find any abnormality. Now, another case I want to show is sporadic case, which was another 16-year-old female. There's progressive scoliosis since the age of 10 years, she says, and inability to move her eyes horizontally since birth. There was no family history in this patient, and antenatal history was insignificant. Now, this is again showing right scoliosis. As you can see, in all three patients, I have shown right scoliosis. I don't know why it is only happening to the right anyway. And she was also hypermetrope, about 40 PD of esotropia she had, and about +7, +6 refraction. So there was an esotropia which was accommodative in her, and because of that, her eyes had gone into, the MRs have gone into contracture because she can't move her horizontal eyes. So there was some kind of contracture, and with glasses also, her accommodative part could not be corrected. So she needed surgery. It goes in jerks. Now here also you find intorsion, which can be seen. So all three, and this is 9 gaze after we had done MR recession in both the eyes, about 5.5 millimeter, and you can see after surgery, her alignment is perfect. Slides are not moved. This is radiological features. You can see again, this child also, there is pontine hypoplasia, and those classical features of AGPPS can be seen. This is post-op as I showed you. Now, AGPPS is rare presentation. About more than 100 cases approximately have been described. Phenotype overlap with CFM may be there, as we saw in this one. May present with accommodative esotropia or convergent substitution. May require surgery for these reasons. Most reports are from orthopedic and radiology specialties. And beware, eyes only see what mind knows. So you may miss the diagnosis. So it is important to tell that one may be aware of this, and so that you don't miss the diagnosis. There's very few slides about Mobius I want to show you, because this is again another condition which you may see once in a while. Now, Paul Julius Mobius, he was a Leipzig neurologist, also known for Mobius sign and Mobius disease, also known for monographs on physiology of weak-mindedness of women and pathology of men of genius. Now, Mobius syndrome or sequence has a lot of features which are very global. It is sporadic, heritable. Global CCDD may involve multiple nerves, facial palsy, unilateral, bilateral. Lower part of the face may be spared. There is limitation of abduction, bilateral, or there could be esotropia or could be exotropia also. This could be also unilateral, but you can also have most will have an eso, but rarely you can have ortho and exo also. So don't think that it will always produce an esotropia. There is a conjugate horizontal gaze palsy, DRS, CFM could be sitting together with these, with Mobius syndrome. So these possibilities should be there. About 1/3 of cases have DRS, bilateral DRS. So when you have DRS, you should also look for Mobius. So look for facial nerve function, and you may find that this is actually Mobius, which is presenting rather just a DRS. There is hypoplastic asymmetrical furrowed tongues in some of these cases. Limb anomalies, speech, feeding problems, and mental retardation and autism are important features which need joint approach with neurologist and with pediatrician, and for autism, all that is required. So now this is showing one unilateral Mobius syndrome. You can see on the left side, his eye is an ESO, and there is a facial nerve palsy. You can see that this side, left side is sagging, and nose is also tipping to the right. So there is some kind of hemifacial microsomia. And the condition is because of the exposure, because there is a facial nerve palsy. This is showing 9 gazes. You can see that the eye doesn't, the left eye doesn't abduct, and So this presents like a unilateral sixth nerve, but this is other eye is normal, is having normal reductions. This is showing another one, bilateral Mobius. You can see the tongue is furrowed, hypoplastic, and these are very classical features which you may see. Not all of them have this. And this is showing clinodactyly and knock knees, lot of features which you have in extremities, which can be there in Mobius. So you need to evaluate them systemically. They may also, as I said, they can cross with CFUM, and a lot of other findings can also be there on eye examination. So one should keep in mind the possibility of Mobius also when you are looking at CCBDs. Now Mobius conclusions, diverse in presentation, look for Mobius in infantile esotropia and DRS, maybe esotropia mostly. You can also have an ortho or exo Mobius syndrome. Surgical options are not the same, may not be the same, because here the problem is different. The sixth nerve is this thing affected, and MR may also be contractured. So you can't treat it like an infantile ESO. Check for facial nerve function and systemic associations. Thank you. With that, I come to the end. If there are any questions, anything somebody wants to ask, Dr. Subhash, you want to say something?
There are no questions in the question box, and we are perfectly on time.
We are on time. 1 minute more, or we are 1 minute? 56 seconds are there.
50 seconds.
Dr. Pradeep has left, I think. He's-
No, no,
Yeah.
I am here. Dr. Pradeep has left. Dr. Pradeep has left.
So I would like to thank the organizers, and thank you particularly for very nice glitch-free this thing, presentation. Only thing in last presentation, I think there was a little problem. I am sorry for that. There's some technical issue. So nice of you. It was really being with you, and really so.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Prasad. We can.
All right, with this, it was really great to have you, Dr.